Project. 6 million individuals committed to the end of the persistence of hunger is proud to present, live from the International Conference Center in Dakar, Senegal, from United Nations headquarters in New York, and from the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., a global satellite teleconference announcing the winner of the 3rd annual Africa Prize for Leadership for the Sustainable End of Hunger.
Voilà, mesdames et messieurs, les regards sont donc à présent braqués sur le Sénégal. Bienvenue au président de la République du Sénégal, le président Abdou Diouf, le premier lauréat du prix Leadership Afrique et président de la cérémonie. Mais tout à l'heure, depuis New York, M. Bradford Morse lui-même le présentera à tous ceux qui nous regardent en ce moment. J'en profite pour souhaiter la bienvenue aux 30 pays de par le monde qui ont tenu à s'associer à l'événement, grandissime événement, n'est-ce pas, puisque vous le savez, il s'agit de célébrer ceux qui, à travers le continent africain, mènent une lutte inlassable pour l'éradication de la faim. So welcome to you all, wherever you are. We are happy to be with you in this historic moment. Tout de suite, nous allons donner la parole au docteur Peter Bourne du conseil d'administration de Hunger Project. Monsieur Bourne, que voici, a été conseiller spécial du président Carter, sous-secrétaire général des Nations Unies, et il est actuellement président de l'Association américaine pour la santé dans le monde, une carrière donc entièrement consacrée au mieux-être de l'humanité. Dr. Boone.
Mr. President of the Republic, honorable ministers, distinguished members of the National Assembly, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, friends and supporters of the Hunger Project around the world, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Hunger Project, it gives me very great pleasure to welcome you to today's event, the announcement of the winner of the 3rd Annual Africa Prize for Leadership. For the Board of Directors and the Executive Director, Joan Holmes, I'd like to express our heartfelt thanks and deep appreciation to President Diouf for graciously consenting to preside over today's ceremony. As you know, Mr. President, Ms. Holmes deeply regrets that she is unable to be with us today. She has asked me, as a member of the Board of Directors, to represent the Hunger Project on this occasion and to convey to you and the people of Senegal her warmest regards and best wishes. Earlier this year, she and I had the special pleasure of visiting this country, and we experienced the sincere commitment of the government and the people of Senegal to ending the problems of environmental degradation, poverty, underdevelopment, and particularly hunger and malnutrition. As we all know, President Diouf was the distinguished winner of the 1st Africa Prize for the widely recognized leadership he has provided in addressing these problems, not only for the people of Senegal, but for all Africans. President Diouf's commitment to the end of hunger was further demonstrated earlier this year when he created his own award to recognize the farmers of outstanding accomplishment throughout Senegal. In honoring these farmers, some of whom are here with us today, President Diouf paid tribute not only to the farmers of Senegal, but to all small-scale farmers throughout Africa and the vital role they must play in ending hunger on this continent. The 1989 Africa Prize for Leadership is made possible by the more than 6 million individuals in 152 countries who are committed to a partnership with the people of Africa and who have pledged themselves to ending hunger by enrolling in the Hunger Project. Today, we are joined by more than 6,000 representatives of that global constituency at special telephone and satellite television events in all parts of the globe. Friends of Africa are participating in this announcement in 25 countries, including India, Zambia, Sweden, France, and Australia. They are listening in more than 100 cities around the world. For this historic broadcast, our distinguished guests around the world include 700 diplomats and distinguished leaders at the United Nations headquarters in New York, 500 at the National Press Club in Washington, where the event is being sponsored by the Congressional Black Caucus. At that event also is a great American leader, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, from whom we will be hearing shortly. 2,000 people are gathered in London, Delhi, Geneva, and Ottawa, and 200 leading Japanese friends of Africa who have come together in Tokyo, where it is now after midnight on the morning of August the 4th. This important announcement is also being televised live around the world through various television networks to an estimated audience of 10 million people. To all of you everywhere, deeply committed to honoring the people and leaders of Africa, on behalf of the Hunger Project, I extend you a warm welcome. Your Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, if hunger is to be ended, then strong, decisive leadership is required. It demands leadership that goes beyond the usual responsibilities of office. It demands leadership entailing exceptional vision, compassion, selflessness, and a willingness to take risks. The Hunger Project created the Africa Prize to recognize, reward, and foster support for such inspired leadership. The Africa Prize for Leadership is intended to honor not just heads of state, but Africans, men or women from any walk of life, who have made an outstanding contribution to the general well-being of the people of their country, their region, or even the continent as a whole. In addition, it seeks to generate heightened awareness throughout the world of the many African leaders at all levels who are making the difficult decisions and taking the necessary, often brave, actions to resolve the pressing agricultural, economic, and social issues facing this region of the world. By awarding the prize, the Hunger Project hopes to create the opportunity for the world to relate to Africa as a place of enormous opportunity, promise, and possibility. Africa's leaders are increasingly directing their energies and resources towards achieving economic viability for their people, especially through a greater emphasis on the development of the agricultural sector. As a result, for the first time in more than a decade, Africa's per capita food production is on the increase. Many countries have already reached the OAU target for 1990 of investing 20% or more of their budgetary resources in agriculture. And some 30 countries have embarked on programs of structural readjustment, which, while sometimes demanding short-term sacrifice, are designed to enhance in the long run the efficiency of the rural sector and promote economic growth. Furthermore, in a carefully thought-out plan titled The African Alternative Framework, launched just 4 weeks ago, Africa's finance ministers have reaffirmed their responsibility of Africa for its own development and committed its leadership to more effective use of human and financial resources to achieve economic growth. All of these developments, launched by the leaders of Africa, suggest that the continent is now on a trajectory that must ultimately lead to a self-sustaining victory over hunger and malnutrition. These changes involved often painful and difficult decisions and trade-offs, which we should recognize and applaud. President Diouf recognized this historic opportunity when, in his speech accepting the 1987 Africa Prize, he said, and I quote, "The time is right for a quantitative leap to be made in the struggle against hunger. To make this leap, we must forge a powerful, collaborative partnership between the nations and peoples of Africa and the international community. As tensions between the superpowers are diminished, we must seize the opportunity to bring together leaders from different nations, regions, and sectors to address the problems of hunger, underdevelopment, and degradation of the environment as the true threats to the ultimate survival of mankind. We must generate a world in which ending hunger becomes a sustained, and I emphasize sustained, priority on the political and economic agenda of all countries, ensuring the necessary reallocation of resources nationally and internationally. Mr. President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is towards creating such a world that the Africa Prize for Leadership is directed. Thank you very much.
Greetings and welcome to the United Nations headquarters in New York. My name is Charlene Hunter-Gauld, and I am an anchor on the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour on public television here in the United States. I am very honored to join my colleague, Mr. Dianya, in moderating today's broadcast. Here in New York, we are pleased to have as our co-host Her Excellency Madame Absa Claude Diallo, Ambassador of Senegal. In just a moment, we are going to turn to Washington, D.C., to the National Press Club for our featured speaker, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. As you know, the Reverend Jackson is a renowned civil rights leader who worked with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. and his Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and then went on to found and lead his own program for economic development, the Chicago-based PUSH, People United to Save Humanity. The Reverend Jackson was a candidate for the presidency of the United States in 1984 and 1988, and today he is the president of the National Rainbow Coalition, a liberal political movement embracing a broad cross-section of minorities and others. Reverend Jackson is an ordained Baptist minister and author and has frequently traveled to Africa. Recently, the Reverend Jackson has dramatically articulated a powerful rebirth of the spirit of partnership of African American people with the people of Africa. Our co-host for the Washington event is the Congressional Black Caucus, whose 24 members are recognized champions on the Hill for our country's partnership with the African people in their struggle against hunger. Some of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus serve on the House Select Committee on Hunger. In just a few moments, we will be hearing from the Reverend Jackson at the National Press Club. It is now my pleasure to introduce my friend and Africa's friend, the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me express my thanks to you, Charlene, for such a kind and generous introduction, and to President Diouf and to leaders all around the world, to members of our family who've gathered today to address this challenge of our hour. I want to express my appreciation to the Hunger Project for inviting me to participate in this very significant international telecast to end world hunger. To all of you gathered in 21 nations from Australia to Canada, from South America to Western Europe to Japan and Africa, I bring greetings from the people of the United States of America. We're gathered today to honor all of you who are fighting to bring economic, political, and social development as catalytic forces to end world hunger. We gather as a family. At the same time, we celebrate the progress and achievements in the global effort to wipe out hunger. We're reminded of the growing proportions of the crisis today. There are 750 million people, one-fourth of whom live in Africa, who suffer from persistent hunger. Every day, 35,000 of our brothers and sisters around the world die needlessly of hunger. We need an international mobilization of commitment and action by individuals, institutions, and governments to provide hungry people with the opportunity to generate the economic wherewithal to feed themselves. No one in the world, American, African, Asian, need go hungry. There's enough food in the world to ensure that everyone can go to bed with a full stomach. How do we make this happen? How do we bring about economic prosperity to displace poverty, malnutrition, and starvation? There is no simple answer, but there are some facts that we know. There is enough food to feed everyone. No one need go to bed hungry. Technology alone is not the answer. We have improved strains of rice, improved planting and irrigation techniques, but that alone cannot bring an end to hunger. Charity is not the answer. Aid is necessary in cases of emergency, but in the long run, what is important is to promote greater self-reliance. Aid can be a helping hand, but it cannot sustain a people forever. Only economic development can provide growth and stability. Empowerment is vital to finding a solution for the end of hunger and poverty. We need empowerment for smaller family farmers who grow flowers for export rather than food. Empowerment for poor consumers and workers so that they can have the minimum resources to feed their families. And empowerment for poor countries to develop independent plans to develop their countries. Experience has shown that there are many systems that can be productive. Nature requires many different crops, but what is essential is empowerment. For without empowerment, we will not address hunger. There is no simple answer, but there must be an international response and forge an international commitment, for we live in a world linked by trade, telecommunications, and mutually dependent futures. The United States, Europe, and Japan bear a special responsibility as the beneficiaries of unequal, oftentimes exploitative relationships with countries of the third world. These nations must spearhead the drive for international economic justice and development. There can be no solution to world hunger without a plan for more equitable distribution of resources, without a plan to end the regional conflicts that wreak havoc upon the economic stability and agricultural development of nations. It does little good to wring our hands about the impoverishment of Southern Africa while South Africa continues to invade, occupy, and foment armed warfare upon its neighbors. We need an international Marshall Plan for the third world to provide our neighbors with the seed capital to build and grow. We need a plan for international debt relief to lift the burden of debt, which is crushing the lives of millions. We need relief from the International Monetary Fund's austerity programs, which steadily drive down the living standards of those in the third world who are striving to get out of debt only to find precious economic resources funnel to generating foreign exchange. We need democratic development strategies to promote land reform and more equitable distribution of resources. Development strategies which promote greater self-reliance, even at the cost of a slower or lower return on past debts, or a better investment in the long run for all of us. We can end world hunger if we have the will, if we have a plan, if we're willing to make the choices necessary for the overall good of our global village. I salute the Hunger Project and its award, the Africa Prize, which is a positive force promoting the worthy achievements of African leaders devoted to the sustainable end of hunger. In short, the Africa Prize helps to keep hope alive from Sahel to South Africa. I salute the thousands of committed men and women around the world who are working to create a new era of international cooperation and action to end hunger. The crisis is urgent. There are more hungry people in the world today than ever before. Time is growing short, but I'm convinced that our plea for peace, prosperity, and international goodwill will not go unheard. Hunger can be ended by the end of the century. This will be humanity's greatest achievement, one word of what it truly means to be human. End the building of weapons that cannot be used, preparing for wars that must not be fought. Let's beat our swords into plowshares, our spears into pruning hooks, and study war no more, not rise up nation against nation. This project is a measure of our character. How do we measure our character around the world today? Not by what we have, but by what we share. Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, liberate the captive, aid the sick. We must be relentless in our war on hunger. Let us treat children right in the dawn of life, and poor people with concern in the pit of life, and old people with dignity in the sunset of life. Let's care. Our character is our treasure. God bless you, and congratulations.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson, for those inspiring and provocative words. It is now my honor to introduce to you the chairman of the Africa Prize jury, the Honorable Bradford Morris, a man who is known throughout the world as a humanitarian, a statesman, and peacemaker. As a representative in the United States Congress, as administrator of the UN Development Program for 13 years, and today as president of the Salzburg Seminar, Brad Morris's life epitomizes the highest levels of public service. Throughout his career, Mr. Morris has constantly demonstrated his commitment to the African continent and to the well-being of its people. In 1985, at the personal request of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Morris was appointed head of the Office for Emergency Operations in Africa. As such, he was responsible for coordinating and directing the world's response to the African famine. In just 4 months, he organized an unprecedented 125-nation conference on hunger in Africa and mobilized more than $3 billion in aid for the continent. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce the chairman of the Africa Prize International Jury and our good friend, Mr. Bradford Morris.
Thank you very much, Charlene. Thank you very much, Charlene. President Diouf, Ambassador Barrows, Ambassador Diallo, Your Excellencies, friends, and colleagues throughout the world. It's been a high privilege for me to serve as chairman of the international jury that has been entrusted with the responsibility of deciding upon the award of the 1989 Africa Prize for Leadership for the Sustainable End of Hunger. And I certainly would like to thank my colleagues on the jury. Dame Nita Barrows of Barbados is here with us today. Dr. Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution. My good friend Mark Chona of Zambia. Idi Omaro of Niger, the Secretary General of the Organization of African Unity, and Dr. M.S. Swaminathan of India, the former head of the International Rice Research Institute. Now, the African Prize is much, much more than a single accolade to individual men and women for their achievements. It's an initiative through which each one of us can play a modest yet vital role in creating permanent, supportive, and productive partnership with the people of Africa. Many of you who have involved in this ceremony today have submitted nominations for the Africa Prize. This year we've received more nominations for more nominees than ever before, including for the first time nominations from the Soviet Union and Eastern European countries. And as a result, the African Prize truly more fully reflects the global recognition of the importance of African leadership. The selection of winners of the Africa Prize presented an enormous challenge, but the jury has been inspired in its task by the high standard of achievement of those who have been nominated, achievement which has contributed immeasurably to the well-being of the people of Africa. This year, the jury has chosen not one, but two outstanding individuals whose leadership has strengthened the ability of the people of Africa to be nourished in the face of Africa's cruel environmental adversaries. One of the laureates this year is a leader whose sustained efforts to develop nutrition, health, education, and housing for the people of his country have improved the quality of their lives beyond measure. When his country recently experienced the worst drought in its recorded history, he was determined that not one person would starve in spite of the catastrophe, and his leadership redeemed that promise. His leadership, his unyielding integrity, and his total devotion to the rights of every single human being have made him one of the most respected political leaders in Africa and in the world. His Excellency, President Kwet KJ Masiri of Botswana. Botswana is an arid land, a landlocked country in southern Africa. Yet in this threatening environment, it has achieved the lowest level of infant mortality in sub-Saharan Africa. In 1985, Kwet Masiri played a vital role in the negotiations which brought Botswana to independence. He served as Vice President and Minister of Finance from independence until 1980, when he was elected President of his country. And shortly after his election, a drought descended upon Botswana, which did not break until 1987. And during this period, a thorough and effective system of monitoring and food distribution, which President Masiri instituted, prevented drought from becoming famine. And Botswana emerged from the drought with less malnutrition than in the years before it came. President Masiri's administration continues to provide opportunity to Botswana's people in a variety of ways, and let me cite just a few. Increased decentralization of planning and decision-making to strengthen local authorities, more schools, more health facilities in the rural areas, clean water supplies to more and more villages, upgraded rural roads, extension offices to promote small village-based industries, better access to credit, continued expansion of production in the livestock sector. Throughout his administration, President Masiri has earned the respect of the world for his commitment to rapid economic growth, to social justice, and sustained development. Botswana has had exceptional, extraordinary growth, 12% a year for the last 10 years. And with characteristic wisdom and vision, President Misseri has used the income from his country's mineral resources to develop agriculture and to dramatically advance Botswana's food security. A multi-party democracy supported by free institutions, Botswana has an unparalleled record in human rights, a free press, an independent judiciary, and a determined commitment to a harmonious non-racial society. As President, Dr. Misseri has earned the respect of the world for the integrity of the government which he heads. And despite his country's vulnerable geographic position and its suffering from persistent commando attacks, I need not identify the source, President Misseri is universally recognized as a vigorous, outspoken, unretreating opponent of apartheid. Our second laureate in 1989, the founder of Africa's largest and most successful grassroots movement for self-reliance, is a bold, visionary leader who has motivated hundreds of thousands of small-scale farmers to take charge of their own development. He knows, he understands, he respects the traditional wisdom and culture of the people of his region, and he's built a movement which is firmly rooted in the strength of those traditions. The two groups which he heads, the NAM movement and G6S, are based on the unassailable philosophy that people have within themselves the key to their own development. Few Africans have provided the kind of leadership which the Hunger Project's Africa Prize was established to honor than Bernard Ledea Ouedraogo of Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso, like Botswana, is landlocked and arid. It was devastated during the Sahel drought of 1969 through 1972, and again by the African drought of 1983 through 1986. For generations, people of this area have worked cooperatively in what are called NAMs. But the organized NAM movement, founded by Dr. Ouedraogo in 1967, trains animators, as they're called, leaders, from village groups who provide skills and techniques whereby the NAM can make its own decisions and raise its own standard of living. The animators built upon the needs, the aspirations, and the abilities of the peasants. Since 1976, this technique has become an international movement reaching 3,600 village development groups in 9 West African countries: Burkina Faso, Chad, the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. And through the 6S Association, which is unique in seeking untied aid, funds are obtained from donor countries, which are made available then to responsible local organizations with no strings attached as to provide loans to build self-reliance. NAM and 6S currently involve some 500,000 individuals and benefit millions more. Individual groups are engaged in a wide range of activities, including the acquisition of basic literacy and techniques to improve community and individual health, the enhancement of the purity of water, the improvement of sanitation facilities, the learning of new agricultural techniques, including those related to vegetable gardening, and methods to combat erosion, desertification, deforestation, and in strengthening, in some cases, building the essential infrastructure, particularly roads and other transportation and communication facilities. And all of these have created new jobs to relieve the poverty which is the cruel parent of hunger. A pioneer in grassroots development, Dr. Ouedraogo has earned worldwide recognition for his longtime leadership and dedication to his people. And in 1987, he was awarded the United Nations World Environment Prize and the UNICEF Prize for Peace. As one who has been privileged to work as I have with the courageous people of the Sahel for almost 20 years, I'm particularly happy that we can acknowledge Dr. Ouedraogo's unparalleled accomplishment and contribution to humanity today. To each of our 1989 laureates, I extend my warmest congratulations. And in honoring these outstanding leaders, we honor millions of African men and women whose creativity and determination are forging a better, more hopeful life for the people of Africa. I now have the very high and very personal honor to present a truly great leader who, with characteristic graciousness and generosity, is the host for this ceremony today in Africa. President Abdou Diouf of Senegal epitomizes the historic strength, the deep-rooted confidence, the eternal spirit of the inspired and inspiring leadership of Africa. This confidence, this spirit, this leadership was the wellspring of the 1986 United Nations Special Session on Africa in this building in New York where we gather today. And at that time, 50 African nations united to create a priority program for their own economic recovery and development. And the man who forged that unity and who passionately articulated Africa's aspirations as chairman of the Organization of African Unity at that time was President Abdou Diouf. For his outstanding and persevering leadership in this achievement, he was chosen in 1987 as the first winner, one of the first winners of the African Prize for Leadership. Always committed to the well-being of the people of his country, under his stewardship, Senegal became in 1987 the first nation in Africa to reach the 1990 target for universal child immunization. And his vision has encompassed the sweep of history as well. For as a result of President Diouf's initiative and his efforts in mobilizing all African states, a memorial will be created to those Africans who were forcibly, cruelly torn from their homes and pressed into slavery, and to the diaspora throughout the world as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you a truly great leader, a truly great man, a leader of Africa, a leader of the world, His Excellency, President Abdou Diouf of Senegal.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée nationale, Monsieur le Président du Conseil économique et social, Monsieur le représentant de la Fondation Hunger Project, Mesdames, Messieurs les ministres, Mesdames, Messieurs les ambassadeurs, Mesdames, Messieurs les députés, Mesdames, Messieurs, il y a à peine 2 ans, à l'occasion d'une soirée mémorable à New York, j'ai eu le privilège de recevoir conjointement avec le professeur Thomas Odjambo le premier prix Leadership Afrique pour l'élimination durable de la faim dans le monde. À la suite de ce premier contact avec la Fondation Hunger Project, Madame Joanne Holmes, directeur exécutif mondial de la dite institution, a bien voulu répondre à mon invitation à effectuer une visite au Sénégal, où nous avons été heureux de l'accueillir au mois de février 1989. Quelques 5 mois après son séjour, voici que la Fondation Hunger Project choisit Dakar, notre capitale, pour annoncer le lauréat de la 3e édition de son prix Leadership Afrique. Plus qu'une nouvelle manifestation de l'intérêt que la Fondation porte à l'action que nous menons dans son domaine d'intervention, cette décision est pour nous un encouragement à poursuivre nos efforts. Mais aujourd'hui, je retiens surtout l'honneur qui lui est fait, encore une fois, à mon pays, et cela ajoute à la joie immense que me procure le seul fait d'être personnellement associé à une cérémonie comme celle qui nous réunit cet après-midi. Je n'oublie pas pour autant qu'ici et maintenant, il s'agit de saluer et d'encourager d'autres mérites. En effet, le prix Leadership Afrique que la Fondation Hunger Project a institué rend hommage chaque année à une personnalité africaine, principalement parce qu'elle s'est signalée dans la lutte contre la faim, que ce soit à travers la conception d'une politique ou que ce soit par son action dans les domaines des sciences et de l'agriculture ou dans ceux de l'éducation et de la santé. Mais, ainsi que je l'ai souligné en 1987 à New York, cette distinction honore moins les mérites du récipiendaire que sa volonté, moins son succès que ses efforts. J'ajoute qu'elle s'attache plus à la détermination et à l'esprit d'initiative, c'est-à-dire au courage. Je sais que ces notions ont encore guidé la Fondation cette année, car ce n'est point hasard si le choix s'est porté, comme vient de l'annoncer mon ami le président Bradford Morse, si le choix s'est porté sur son Excellence le docteur Ket Massiré, président de la République du Botswana, et M. Bernard Ouédraogo, président du mouvement NAM au Burkina Faso. Les deux hommes ont chacun, à son niveau de responsabilité, œuvré de façon inlassable et continuent d'œuvrer à l'éradication de la faim et de la malnutrition. Ainsi, le président Massiré mène à la tête du Botswana une politique agricole qui a permis aux populations de ce pays subtropical d'Afrique australe d'échapper à la famine. Sa détermination et son action soutenue l'ont aidé à faire victorieusement face aux calamités naturelles que sont la sécheresse et la désertification, ainsi qu'à un environnement politique hostile. Quant à M. Bernard Ouédraogo, il a su amener les paysans regroupés dans les associations coopératives affiliées à son mouvement à utiliser de façon harmonieuse, à côté des technologies modernes, ce qu'il y a de plus positif dans leurs techniques ancestrales. Mais ce qui retient davantage l'attention chez lui, c'est qu'après avoir eu l'heureuse initiative de lancer son programme des 6 S, à savoir se servir de la saison sèche en savane et au Sahel, il a su faire de ce mot d'ordre une réalité, les membres du NAM arrivant à produire des surplus vivriers en saison sèche. Le peuple sénégalais se joint à moi pour adresser à ces deux lauréats nos plus chaleureuses félicitations et saluer l'action qui leur vaut d'être distingués. Nous y associons les millions de paysans de leurs pays respectifs, car sans l'engagement et la mobilisation de ceux-ci, sans leurs efforts constants, cette action n'aurait pu être couronnée de succès. L'hommage est d'autant plus mérité qu'à l'instar de toute la paysannerie africaine, ces producteurs évoluent dans un milieu naturel souvent hostile, du fait de divers handicaps connus, comme la désertification au Sahel. Il y a aussi que malgré la baisse du prix de ce qu'ils produisent et le renchérissement des facteurs de production, ils ne se laissent jamais aller au découragement. Il y a surtout qu'ils ont su refuser jusqu'à présent le désespoir auquel peut conduire l'existence à côté de leur environnement rigoureux, fait d'efforts constants et de privations, l'image de surabondance alimentaire qu'offrent les pays du Nord. Or, la distorsion que voilà a été le plus souvent qu'on ne le pense, à l'origine de désordres qui sévissent ailleurs dans de nombreuses régions de l'hémisphère sud, au détriment du développement économique et social des pays concernés, au détriment de la paix mondiale aussi. Ce n'est pas le moindre mérite de la présente cérémonie d'être, par-delà son aspect solennel et protocolaire, une occasion de rechercher les voies et moyens d'atténuer les effets de cette distorsion, à défaut de pouvoir l'enrayer dans l'immédiat. Le combat auquel elle invite ainsi nous concerne tous. Le Sénégal, qui s'y est déjà engagé, au plan interne comme au plan international, continuera de tout mettre en œuvre dans ce sens. Mesdames et Messieurs les membres de la Fondation Hunger Project, Mesdames, Messieurs, comme vous le savez, le gouvernement sénégalais a de tout temps fait du développement de l'agriculture sa première priorité, en consacrant à ce secteur une part importante de ses investissements. Les fondements de son action dans ce domaine ont toujours reposé sur le constat que la paix civile passe par la paix économique. Ils ont toujours reposé sur la conviction que pour bâtir une société paisible parce que juste et équilibrée, il faut faire en sorte que les hommes, les femmes et les enfants qui la composent soient libérés des affres de la famine, de la malnutrition, de l'ignorance et de la maladie. Avec notre nouvelle politique agricole, nous allons encore progresser vers cet objectif. C'est que cette politique s'attache davantage à libérer le producteur pour en faire un agent économique avisé, responsable de sa terre et de la gestion de son exploitation agricole. J'ai dit exploitation agricole pour souligner la vitalité que nous attendons de ce secteur, pour dire qu'il ne s'agit plus pour nous d'assurer seulement notre subsistance, mais aussi de produire plus et mieux pour augmenter les revenus du monde rural et la richesse nationale à travers l'accroissement du volume de nos exportations agricoles et de notre production céréalière. J'ai conscience que les conditions sont nombreuses qu'il faut réunir pour y arriver, mais je sais aussi qu'elles sont à notre portée. Déjà, nous nous employons à réaliser au plan intérieur celles qui dépendent de nous, qu'il s'agisse de la promotion des céréales locales, de l'amélioration des conditions d'accès direct au crédit agricole, de l'encadrement technique là où cela est nécessaire, ou de la vulgarisation agricole en aval de la recherche-développement, nos progrès sont indéniables. Il en est de même de l'alphabétisation fonctionnelle et de l'initiation à la gestion. L'exemple sénégalais n'est pas unique en Afrique. Les autres conditions indispensables au succès de nos efforts tiennent surtout à l'état des relations économiques internationales et aux aléas de la nature. La situation à laquelle nos pays sont confrontés à cet égard est connue. Il n'est pas utile d'insister. Qu'il me suffise de redire qu'en plus de nos efforts, il faut la détermination de toute la communauté internationale pour y mettre fin. Le Sénégal plaide depuis longtemps en faveur de l'esprit de solidarité que cela suppose. C'est pourquoi je voudrais saisir l'occasion que m'offre la cérémonie d'aujourd'hui pour renouveler l'appel que j'avais lancé en 1987 pour la constitution d'un front mondial de la paix économique en Afrique. Il s'agira d'un front pour renverser d'abord, sans délai et de façon durable, les tendances à la dégradation de la situation alimentaire de ce continent et à l'augmentation de sa dépendance vis-à-vis de l'extérieur. Un front aussi pour permettre de préserver l'équilibre écologique de l'Afrique et d'enrichir son capital foncier pour une meilleure productivité. Un front surtout pour favoriser l'émergence de nouveaux systèmes de production et de protection des cultures, des systèmes plus adaptés aux conditions écologiques et économiques du continent. Avec un tel front, nous pourrions éradiquer la faim en Afrique et dans le monde avant la fin du siècle. Prenons la résolution d'œuvrer en commun en vue de sa constitution. Je sais qu'en cette enceinte, je serai entendu, car Hunger Project va précisément dans ce sens. Par son prix, la Fondation ne fait pas qu'encourager ceux qui luttent pour l'éradication durable de la faim, elle apporte aussi un soutien matériel important à l'action du récipiendaire. Les paysans sénégalais ont pu s'en rendre compte à travers l'institution du prix de l'engrais destiné à récompenser ceux d'entre eux qui se sont distingués dans l'utilisation des fertilisants. Madame Joan Holmes a pu assister à la première cérémonie de distribution de ce prix, dont le financement provient des fonds que la Fondation Hunger Project avait mis à ma disposition. Demain, ce sera au tour des paysans du Botswana et du Burkina Faso de sentir ce que leur aura concrètement apporté l'action de la dite fondation. Ceux d'autres pays suivront certainement. C'est en tout cas mon vœu le plus cher, car sa réalisation indiquerait que les efforts significatifs déployés par les Africains eux-mêmes pour éradiquer la faim se sont encore multipliés. Je souhaite aussi que l'initiative de Hunger Project inspire d'autres organisations, toujours plus nombreuses, afin que de la sorte prenne forme progressivement le Front mondial de la paix économique en Afrique dont j'ai déjà parlé. Ce continent pourra alors réaliser son vrai destin et contribuer par sa sagesse et son cœur à réconcilier le monde avec lui-même. Merci de votre attention.
Mr. President, on behalf of all of us around the world who are joining you today, permit me to express our appreciation for your inspiring and challenging words today and for the leadership you provide us on this most urgent issue. In acknowledging the co-recipients of this year's Africa Prize for Leadership, I am now delighted to call on the representatives of the two nations honored here today to comment on behalf of their respective governments. First, allow me to call on the United Nations representative who is with us today from the Republic of Botswana, the wife of Ambassador Joseph Leguela. Ambassador Leguela is on duty in Namibia. We will now hear from Mrs. Polila Leguela.
I thank you, Madam Chairperson. This announcement has indeed taken my delegation by surprise, but it's a pleasant surprise, I must say. On behalf of my government, I want to thank everyone here who is part of this project and who has helped to organize this wonderful occasion for all of us in this room, particularly all the Hunger Project sponsors who are working very hard on this major problem of hunger, in particular in my continent in Africa. We all know that the Hunger Project organizers, like all of us in here, are very much committed to ending hunger on our planet by the end of this century. At this point, Madam Chairman, I must stress, as a member of the Frontline States, that this honor is not for my president, President Masire, as an individual or for the Botswana people, but it is an honor for everybody, all the people that are struggling to be free, particularly in my region in Southern Africa. This includes women, men, and even children who are dying right now as we are gathered in this room. This also includes the unknown who have died in the struggle for peace, particularly Namibia, South Africa, and the other regions in the continent, particularly in Southern Africa. At this point, Madam Chairperson, I don't think I can add to what Mr. Bradford Moss has said about my president and my country. I think he has portrayed a glorious picture of Botswana. I don't think it is that glorious, but I must haste to say President Masire and the people of Botswana, as you have clearly illustrated to us, is very committed to eradicating the problem of hunger in Botswana. And as you have again clearly illustrated, that during our draft period, my president worked very hard together with his government to make sure that everyone who was affected did get what he deserved during that difficult times. President Masire, in addition to being committed to the hunger problem, he's also very much committed to the peace in Southern Africa. I will gladly convey this good news to my government, Madam Chairman. I can see I'm rushed to stop. I will leave the rest to my president when he's given the occasion. And again, I sincerely thank every one of you.
Thank you, Mrs. Laguela, for your elegant words. I am now honored to call upon the representative of Burkina Faso, the Chargée d'Affaires, Mrs. Fatoumata Da, to offer comments.
Je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion de dire ici combien le Burkina Faso est honoré de voir l'un de ses fils choisi pour recevoir le 3e prix Leadership Afrique, et surtout de le partager avec le président d'un pays ami, le chef d'État du Botswana. La responsabilité du lauréat est d'autant plus grande qu'il aura à prendre place dans vos annales à la suite de 2 prestigieux chefs d'État, leurs excellences les présidents Abdou Diouf du Sénégal et Robert Mugabe du Zimbabwe, de même que l'éminent homme de science africain qu'est le professeur Thomas Odiambo.
This concludes our global broadcast. The Africa Prize for Leadership is made possible by the Hunger Project and by the partnership of organizations and corporations from around the world. The 3rd annual award ceremony of the Africa Prize will be held in New York City on September 14, 1989.